keep the entire segment going just like this with Heatherman, with our DC?
Let's start with Corey Heatherman, the former DC from Minnesota. He spent one season at Minnesota as their DC. Before that, he had a stint at Rutgers for one season, and he had a minor stint for 2 years at James Madison, which I didn't know during those years when James Madison was kind of rocking and rolling. Just a little brief background. He'll be bringing a 4-2-5 defensive scheme, which I think will play favorably with our talent. Last year, Minnesota ranked fifth nationally in total defense, ninth nationally in scoring defense. They tied seventh nationally in total interceptions and tied ninth in passing defense. Rudy, I have to ask, what is Heatherman's impact in season one? What do you think happens?
It's a good question, right? Because it's something that if you look at what he's done, you're getting kind of what we were asking for in terms of
Yeah.
having like a very simple defensive scheme where players can just pin their ears back, play in space, and play fast. The only thing that's interesting about it is what do we expect? Hopefully, what he did with Minnesota, because if you look at what those stats look like from one season to the next, it's a huge change from year to year. And the only thing that's really changed at Minnesota in that time was defensive coordinator. So I'm wondering if he can do the exact same thing. We'll worry about the long-term stuff down the road, like how he's going to recruit, how he's going to bring in his own talent. But if he can do a similar turnaround like he did with Minnesota, Miami becomes a contender to get in the playoff, only because the defense was the only thing that was missing on that team a year ago.
Yeah, and I think there is a precedent for turning around the defense, not just from his end on a Minnesota side, but we saw what Manny Diaz did his first season as D coordinator under Rick, and the turnaround that our defense had then, and how incredible we were. That was the year we obviously brought in the takeover chain. We brought that out. So I'm expecting something similar in the sense. Mario Cristobal had this to say about Heatherman. He said the reasons mentioned for hiring Heatherman are a four-down defensive front, an explosive play at all three levels, elite communication, and physically and mentally tough units. Cristobal reiterated the four-down front wanting the edge players to be disruptive, communicate, and forcing turnovers and putting pressure on the quarterback. That basically sounds like a silver bullet. It's
Tells you,
like,
tells you a
let's
little
just
bit
go down
about.
the list of all the things we didn't do last year.
Well, and go back to what Miami had to do and adjust last year defensively, because
Yeah.
I think what that kind of tells you though is Miami last year ran a three-man front a lot, and the excuse or the way they wanted to spin it, the spin on it was, well, we have a lot of injuries on our defensive line, so we don't have a lot of experience, so we're going to switch to a three-man front. You're kind of running more of like a 3-3-5 defense. Okay, that explains a lot about why the defensive line play, maybe why the linebackers didn't do so well this year. Because
Yep.
if you're playing if your fourth down lineman is also a linebacker dropping back into coverage, that's a different type of body. That's a different type of technique. That's not something that necessarily works well if you're trying to run a four-man front. And like you said, just to lead it off, 4-2-5, that's kind of what the base defense looks like now in college football across the board. That's the closest thing historically to Miami's old Jimmy Johnson 4-3 defense. 4-2-5 is kind of a natural progression. So if you're looking at how Miami's attacked offenses in the past, this is kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think Minnesota was already on an upward trajectory before he came in, Heatherman came in, but you can see from the 2023 numbers, the 24 numbers, everything ticked up. So there were more sacks, more tackles for loss, more interceptions. So he definitely does have an impact, and he definitely does have almost an immediate impact. My question in that now is, how many seasons does it really take? How, in your honest opinion, I know our hope is one. I hope we turn it around next season. But how many seasons do you think it realistically could take, maybe you stick with your same answer, to get this defense back to being that fearsome defense?
I think it's kind of like we have to see year over year, because given the changes in personnel in college football, you could have a great season, but if
Yeah.
you have a total different cast of characters that comes in, you only hope that they could take to the philosophy the way that the previous roster did. So in this day and age, I think all you can worry about is year to year. I don't think you can worry about building a fearsome defense over 3 to 5 years. And that's something that maybe Corey Heatherman noticed too, because he may not have the same luck at Minnesota the next year, even though he just signed that extension like in December. So I think it's something that's a problem that you have to kick down the road for now and just focus on this season. So can they get back to, look, anything was better than last year. So as long as you
Yeah,
can hold
that's
teams
true.
to, look, if you can hold teams to 28, if you can hold them under 30, that's a significant improvement. That's not the old Miami standard, but I think beggars can be choosers in this scenario to say, I'll take under 30.
Right. Or for me, it would be more of like, hey, do you do what the elite teams do? Do you beat the teams handedly that you're supposed to beat? And do you stay in the tough games and get the edge in the harder games, you know? And that's what I'm kind of hoping with our defense. So, like, for example, for Notre Dame next year, if they bring back a bunch of their starters and let's just say UF continues this ride of momentum, you know, going into those games, I don't mind if they put up 35 plus as long as our offense is ticking and we're keeping them at bay. And then in the other games, you know, the games we should be winning, we're holding them to either donuts or low double digits. You know what I mean? Like that's where I don't mind giving up 35 points a game to a really good team, right? You would expect that. But in the first season is what I'm saying. But going into the second, third season, hopefully he's still here. I would like to see a little bit more of kind of what we're seeing in the CFP, where the better teams are still holding the good teams, like in Ohio State, which we'll talk about later. How Texas was still able to hold Ohio State to 28 points, even though they were throttling the first two teams they played in the CFP. Now, you had alluded, Rudy, to some of the players and personnel changes that could occur over the next couple of years and how that could affect Heatherman's, you know, impact on our defense. Are there any players from Minnesota or other teams you think he can possibly bring in or that you would want him to bring in now that he's coming here?
Look, there's that defensive back that's being held hostage still in Wisconsin that I think would be a
Yeah.
great addition because Miami needs as many secondary players as possible. And I think this whole picture hasn't really come fully into hasn't fully developed yet because there are position coaches that are there. There's jobs that are open at Miami, and there's some that are just
Mhm.
new departures. So like Derek Nicholson just today announced that he's leaving Miami. He's taking the job over at he's going to a Big Ten Mizzou. He's going to the SEC.
Mhm.
And he's going to be the linebackers coach there. The linebackers play was not very good the past couple of years. I wouldn't put that all on Derek Nicholson, former Florida State alum. He actually played. He's our age. He played on the Florida State team same time that we were in school. So looking to see who comes in there. Maybe they bring in some good talent on that end, given that linebacking play is always important in a defense. There's only two of them in a 4-2-5 formation. So there's a lot that they're being asked to do. There's a lot of they have to go
Yeah.
into pass coverage. You can't miss those matchups anymore because look, with 5 defensive backs, if they pull out a tight end or a running back, that linebacker is going to have to be on them most of the time if you don't have a safety to man up with them. So I think that's going to be very important to do because as you noticed from Miami last year, Popo Aguirre got hurt. That really hurt things. Francisco Marinoa, who is no longer with the team, declaring the NFL, didn't have his best year last year. Espa Saint had some flashes of glory, but then he also had some moments where he didn't do so well. So I'm interested to
Yeah.
see where that position goes and if any talent kind of comes attracted with that new hire. And the same thing with Joe Salavea, who left to Arizona. We talked about this before, but the whole Samoan connection. They brought in a new member from the nation of Samoa to be part of Miami's front office. So they got the bloodline still going through there, but they're missing a defensive tackles coach. You still have Jason Taylor coaching defensive ends, but you need somebody with some interior, defensive line experience to kind of make that unit whole.
So with the vacancy at linebacker coach now apparent, what do you think about the rumors of Randy Shannon possibly being on the move and maybe returning?
I wouldn't mind it. I mean, it's something that I look. There was already a rumor. I think Bruce Warner, who was always with Dono for a long time, he's a guy that's connected to all these players in the '80s and the '90s, even into the early 2000s. There was a clamoring from them that they wanted Randy Shannon back in some way, shape, or form. Granted, he's hostage right now at Florida State. They're saying that they got rid of him, but he was like the interim defensive coordinator. When
Yep.
they lost their current guy, he's been there for a few years. He's jumped around a lot. So he's been between UCF and the University of Florida and Florida State. Um, I think it fits
He's filling
perfectly.
his Florida college's bingo card. He's like, all right, got this one done.
Yeah, he's getting them. I mean, as long as it doesn't go to like University of Jacksonville or South Florida, something like that, FAU, he should be okay. Um, but I think it complements the whole defensive philosophy really well. It's just a matter of is the rumors that I've been hearing is that because of how he was let go in like 2010,
Right.
there's been a lot of egos between the board of trustees and those who let him go. And also there was a lawsuit at the time, I believe, in
I
terms of
remember
like
that.
wrongful termination that happened. So that's not to say that the bridge was completely burned, but maybe bringing him on in like an analyst or a position coach, um, thought is less damaging than having him as a defensive coordinator or somebody that you could say is kind of close to the head coaching tree. I don't know whether that's something Randy Shannon would want to do because it's kind of a downgrade for him. I don't know
Right.
if the love of alma mater is really that big of an impact to say I'd love to come back and help specifically from a position that he played, in college and coached for a long time as well. He was also the linebackers coach for the Miami Dolphins when Jason Taylor was there as a player. So there
Yeah,
is
that
all
was
this,
another reason. Yeah.
yeah, there's all this ideas of like there's good chemistry between the staff. Look, I think he would be a big help. So if people could put their egos aside and just kind of assemble the best staff, I'd be happy to have him. I don't think it matters from a recruiting perspective so much anymore, given the distance away from the high school kids that he has now. Remember, his son was our age. I went to high school with Xavier Shannon, brought him over from FIU, was on Miami's offensive line. He was our center and like, or one of our offensive linemen for a few years there between like 2006, 2007, 2008. So um, I'd be happy to see it. I don't think the rumor is like a big deal, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Depends on what the hiring situation looks like.
Yeah, I just thought with the vacancy, I thought that was a kind of a convenient little occurrence that was going on there. But Heatherman wasn't the only pickup we had.